Welcome. For those who are here in person, help yourselves to the refreshments in the back. Thank you for coming. My name is Linda Oppenheim. I'm a member of the Not in Our Town Princeton Board, and I'm delighted to open this program. In a minute, I'll give the microphone to my colleague, Joyce Trotman-Jordan, but first, I want to bring to your attention a program that will take place this Saturday in town. Not in Our Town is one of the co-sponsors, and the title is Resisting White Christian Nationalism. It's a workshop being held at Christ Congregation on Walnut Lane. And some of you might already have registered. I was asked to ask you to re-register. They ran into some technical difficulties. If you don't have the QR code, we have a board at the back. You can put your name down and just ask for the workshop flyer, and I will send it to you. And now, Joyce.
Thank you, Linda. We'll begin with our land acknowledgement. My name is Joyce Trotman-Jordan. I too sit on the board of Not in Our Town, and we begin our sessions with our land acknowledgement. The land on which we are living is part of the ancient homeland and traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape people. We pay respect to the Lenni Lenape people, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in their homeland and in the diaspora. We also acknowledge the millions of enslaved Africans and their descendants on whose backs the wealth of this nation was created. Not in Our Town, Princeton is a multiracial, multi-faith group of individuals who stand together for racial justice and inclusive communities. Our focus is to promote the equitable treatment of all and to uncover and confront white supremacy, the system that facilitates the preference, privilege, and power of white people at the expense of non-white people and pits racial and ethnic groups against each other by upholding hierarchies based on proximity to whiteness. Our goal is to identify and expose the political, economic, and cultural systems which have enabled white supremacy to flourish and to create new structures and policies which will ensure equity and inclusion for all. In our commitment to uncovering the blight of white supremacy on our humanity, we take responsibility to address it and to eliminate it in all its forms through intentional actions, starting with ourselves and our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. I'm delighted to introduce this evening's speaker, Lakisha Adams. Through one of my online subscriptions, the Trenton Journal, I watched an interview with Lakisha Adams and knew immediately that we should have her as a continuing conversations presenter, and was delighted when she accepted our invitation. Lakisha Adams is a restorative justice practitioner, strategic leader, and community advocate with more than 20 years of experience advancing equity and systems change. She serves as the director of the Restorative and Transformation Justice Hub in Trenton, an initiative designed to provide restorative responses, youth empowerment programming, and community-based alternatives within the justice system. Lakisha holds a master's degree in public administration from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Her work focuses on bridging community voice with institutional systems to create pathways for accountability, healing, and transformation. In addition to her professional work, Lakisha is an adjunct lecturer, facilitator, and emerging voice in restorative leadership through her initiative, Live Bold and Restored. Grounded in the principles of Ubuntu, I am because we are, she is committed to building spaces where restoration, dignity, and collective responsibility can take root. For those of you who are familiar with the concept of restorative justice, you will hear how it is being practiced right here in Mercer County. For those of you for whom it is a new idea, you will learn about an important justice alternative from a master practitioner. I am so pleased to turn the program over to our speaker tonight, Lakisha Adams.
Thank you, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes? Yes. Thank you for having me. Hey, y'all. Hey. Okay, so to Linda's, as per Linda's introduction, she reached out to me after hearing my interview on the Trenton Journal podcast, talking about the work that's happening in Trenton at the Hub and some of the just about restorative and transformative justice. So by show of hands, can anybody tell me how familiar you are with restorative justice and restorative practices? Familiar? Kind of, sort of, but not really? A little something? Okay, great. So this is going to be a really interactive conversation. I wrote a few notes, and if you have any questions, I guess we're going to do some breakout groups, and we'll kind of go from there. Okay? So again, thanks for having me. And I can be long-winded because nothing brings me more joy than to talk about restorative justice, okay? I will talk to you about it all day, every day, and I never meet a stranger. So I wanted to kind of give you some background about the Hub and how it came to be. Who's familiar with the work at the Hub? No, okay. I got one person, so we're good now. One familiar face. So the Hubs were part of initiative that happened throughout the state. So during the time of the pandemic and George Floyd, there was a lot of advocacy happening throughout the state around how juveniles and young adults were treated within the youth justice system. There was a lot of advocacy around COVID and what was happening in the congregate facilities in terms of increased numbers of infections and things of that nature. So due to a lot of advocacy and I guess divine time, and there was a lot of advocacy throughout the state, a lot of Trenton-based organizations, Newark throughout the state, we started having this conversation about a less punitive approach to dealing with youth in the justice system. So there was eventually there was some legislation passed that would open up restorative and transformative justice hubs. And we know sometimes we get legislation, but the money don't follow. But in this instance, there was actually some funding provided to open up 3 hubs. So the hubs are in Passaic County in Patterson. There's a hub in Essex County in Newark. There's a hub in Camden County. And then, of course, our hub is the hub for Mercer County. So we are the Trenton Center for Healing, Unity, and Belonging. So that's kind of the road to how the hubs came about. It was supposed to be a 2-year pilot program, which we ended up being in a 1-year extension because it took, so it's different providers throughout the state that applied for an RFP through YJC, through the county, that ultimately was selected. Our organization, which is Creative Change Counseling, was the organization selected to open up the hub in Trenton. So with that, it took each of the, Creative Change had to find a location, we had to recruit staff. So all of the hubs it took the initiative longer to get off the ground than what they initially thought. So the pilot is currently in a 1-year extension, which should have expired 2025, but now it expires June 30th of this year. And
recording in progress.
And the goal right now is so YJC is intending to petition the legislature to add it to the regular budget, in addition to requesting 2 additional hubs be allowed to open up in different counties. So we're not 100% sure whether additional 2 hubs will open. I think I might have a little idea where one is. And so we are now, as a collective, so all of the hubs, we meet quarterly just to check in, to see how things are going, to learn best practices and connect with one another. And collectively, we want to, advocate to ensure that the hubs are added to the statewide budget so that they remain open and allowed to exist, in addition to opening additional hubs in other counties. So that's kind of the goal and the trajectory of the hub project as it stands right now. So I wanted to give you some of that context because, you know, I appreciate this being a conversation. And so I just want to have this as a conversation, as a person, as a practitioner who's doing this work in real time. Not necessarily the theory of some of the things, well, we might be able to touch on that, but I think it's more important that we have this conversation in real time to kind of explore the impact that this has on the families we serve and on the systems. And I think one of the major things I want to start with is we've gotten really comfortable as a community talking about race. Like, we can talk about race, we have all of the jargon, we can say all the things. However, we're not doing as good of a job changing the conditions that continue to create the harm. And so we've learned a lot of the language around equity, but we're still trying to figure out how do we practice equity. And so I want to kind of preface the conversation with that, because I want us to not just sit here and say this was a great conversation, but really think deeply about what it is that we can do to really move the needle in terms of how we are showing up in community where we are constantly facing systems of oppression. So I have a little video that I want to start as we talk about restorative justice and restorative practices, because I feel like some of you know, some of you may not know, but I'm always, I like to kind of ensure that we're all starting from the same baseline. And this is a really good elevator pitch of, if someone asks you about restorative justice, this is a really less than 2-minute video on what restorative justice and restorative practices are.
Our world is changing at a breathtaking pace. Social patterns that have long characterized human life are changing dramatically around the globe, diminishing social bonds within families, schools, workplaces, and communities. But humans are hardwired to connect. Just as we need food, shelter, and clothing, we also need strong and meaningful relationships to thrive. With all this in mind, what is restorative practices? Restorative practices is an emerging social science that studies how to strengthen relationships between individuals and within communities. When put into practice, the effects are profound. In schools, students experience greater safety and sense of belonging, resulting in improved behavior, less bullying, and less violence. In workplaces, leaders facilitate direct communication among staff and address conflict as it arises. The result is higher performance, greater accountability, and effective collaboration. In criminal justice, new options allow victims and offenders, friends and family, to repair the emotional harm caused by crime. Throughout our neighborhoods, restorative practices give regular people more voice in the issues that matter most. In a nutshell, restorative practices is the science of relationships and community. Your individual daily interactions have a big impact on the world around you, at your job, with young people, and throughout your community. How we relate matters. This video was brought to you by the International Institute for Restorative Practices. To learn more, attend our flagship event, Basic Restorative Practices, enroll in a graduate course, or join us at a world conference.
It's done. Okay, so I like to start with that video because while I'm a trained practitioner through IIRP, I'm a master trainer and a trainer through their restorative justice curriculum. I don't love it, but if I'm 100, it's interesting. So I've co-taught a course last semester here at Princeton through the School of Public and International Affairs. And it's interesting, the professor who I co-taught with, her name is Maya Daman. And we had this joke because we talked about some of our restorative justice experience. And I was like, oh, so where were you? And she's an attorney by practice, but, you know, RJ is very specific training. So I asked her, where was she, you know, trained at? She said, oh, girl, I was trained in a Black church. I said, oh, I took IIRP training. It's like the whitest school you can go to. So for her to have credibility, she had to get it at a Black church. And for me to have credibility, I had to get it from a white institution. But that's just how. But that speaks to this work, right? And so it's, you know, it's kind of sad, but it's funny. So I am trained to facilitate restorative practices training through IARP, and I did it because actually the Trenton Public Schools have been trained by IIRP, and so we have an MOU with Trenton Public Schools at the hub, and so I wanted to make sure that we all speak the same language when I go in to train. And so I don't love it, but you know, you got to do what you got to do sometimes. So I wanted to kind of make one distinction before we go into the conversation. So typically, how I describe it, restorative practices is what you saw here. And restorative justice. So restorative justice specifically refers to a harm situation, right? So when we think about restorative justice, a harm has happened, and we are kind of using this process to navigate that process to hopefully address the harm by the person who was harmed and the person that experienced it. But restorative practice is just really a set of principles that we try to live by from a preventative standpoint. Like every day, we try to embed listening. Oh, look at that, you know, active listening, some basic principles in what we do regularly. And so I wanted to make that distinction because sometimes the terms are used very interchangeably, but restorative justice specifically addresses harm. And our hub is a restorative and transformative justice hub because it was created to support youth that were either leaving the JJC facilities or high-risk youth in a community that are at risk of going into the JJC facilities. However, what we do on a day-to-day, if a young person is referred to us, it's kind of late. That means they already entered and had some level of contact with the system. So what we do is we try to create we created a robust array of programming from the preventative standpoint. So we have young people that come to the hub Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, sort of like an after-school program, and we just do a lot of different activities. If you go to we're on TikTok now, but if you go to our TikTok and our Instagram and our website, you'll see a lot of the programs that we just do with young people on a day-to-day basis. Any questions around that? Okay, great. So now I want to talk a little bit about, you know, how do we name the reality of race, power, and root causes? Because I appreciate coming into a space where a land acknowledgement happens because we do that at the beginning of everything that we do. So I didn't even have to do that part, right? Because we borrow these practices. Restorative justice is an indigenous practice, and it is rooted from indigenous culture. You know, American policing is still fairly a new phenomenon, the way in which we see it. You know, back when the indigenous people were in the lands, it was the elders that they went to for the wisdom to resolve conflict. And if you go into other countries around the world, they still use some level of restorative frameworks. And I share this all the time when people come to the hub and I give them a tour. I went to Colombia for Christmas maybe 3 years ago. And there's a part in Colombia where the first freed Africans in any of the Americas exist called Palenque. And in Palenque, there's no police and there's no crime. And that's present day. So we know some of these indigenous practices, we know they work. We know that there's an over-policing of brown communities. We know that we spend more money than any other country on policing and legal systems, and yet we don't feel any safer, and we are not turning the curve in terms of recidivism. You can lock someone up for 20 years. It never means that they took accountability for what they did. And so through our Restorative and Transformative Justice Hub, we go through a series of processes and circles, and you know, the community circles are one part of the restorative process, but we go through a series of modalities to let young people know the impact of their behavior, essentially. And we do it in a way that they still feel loved, they still feel cared for, they still feel heard, they still feel seen. So there's a way that you can hold people accountable, I like to say, and still leave them with their dignity. And if you had to do your elevator pitch of restorative and transformative justice, I would say it's addressing harm without creating more harm. Basic, very basic. How do I address a harm situation without creating more harm for anyone involved in it? And so as we start to talk about that, I want to talk about how do we talk about harm? When we talk about harm, we are often focusing on the incident, but not the conditions that made the harm possible. So at the hub, we focus on what we call root causes, right? We focus on economic inequity, educational disparities, over-surveillance in certain communities, the lack of access to mental health supports, and generational trauma and disinvestment. Because at the end of the day, that's the real cause of the harm. This outward manifestation of an incident that may have transpired between two people, but when you are living in an environment that is not cared for, and you don't have the access to the same resources and opportunities, that's the real harm. And we can talk about the behavior, but are we going to address the root causes that create the environment where the behavior is able to take place? And our work at the hub, so we're not just looking at behavior, we're looking at unmet needs, we're looking at unaddressed trauma, and we're responding to systems that love to respond to symptoms as opposed to the actual causes. And restorative frameworks gives us the opportunity to address the root cause, because sometimes the participants that come to our hub, I don't even think they're at court requesting to go to the hub. So, and we hold them accountable. We had an incident very early on, and they're like, are we suspended? I was like, no, you're gonna have to come here and listen to me. They're like, they're so accustomed to when they do something wrong that they're suspended or isolated, that to actually have to sit and talk about it, it's building a muscle in them, and it just doesn't feel good. And so that's the thing about restorative justice. It is, how do I bring the person who caused the harm to have to face the person that they harm, and what does that look like? You took my pocketbook, but you don't realize the impact that had. And we had a actual situation in our hub where one of our former participants, he said, this is too much, I can't do this anymore. So he stopped coming to the hub, but he still stayed connected to us. And him and his friend stole somebody's car. We figured out who stole the car, and at the end of the day, the car was returned, the money that it cost to be impounded was paid, and all of the young men that was involved in the incident were brought to the hub. Police were never called. So when we think about community connections and community work, this is what it is. It's community-led solutions as opposed to systemic ones. And, we built enough relationship with the one that we knew. He was like, I'm not going down by myself. And what was going down, because we didn't call the police, but because the young lady, she came through the system. She was getting her life together. She had a small child. She missed her nursing exam as a result of not having a job. And he had to listen to that. She went to his house and spoke to his mother. And we resolved it without any police intervention. And not that that can happen all the time, but that's the power of the process. That's the power when we build relationships and genuine connections with the community. We can learn to address some of the things and let the police do police work. Right? And let us as a community figure out, she didn't want them locked up, she just needed her car back, and we did that. And so I want us to sit with what we often call bad behavior is frequently an unmet need or an unaddressed condition. And so the traditional legal system has there's limits around the traditional responses to harm. Those systems are designed to control, to contain, to punish, but very rarely do they provide understanding. Do they actually provide any repair? They don't provide any form of transformation, and race impacts how those responses show up. Who gets grace versus who gets punishment? Who gets support versus who gets surveillance? And I worked in New York in the juvenile justice system for over 20 years. And it would be very interesting if a white young kid showed up, they would not even go through the system, they will be released to their parent and just go, like, tell them not to do that again. And then we have someone else who's in a juvenile detention center. Like, I'm sorry, like, and sometimes the offense is more egregious than the other. And so we can't ignore the fact that race plays a big part in who gets justice and who gets grace and who does not. And so I appreciate that these restorative justice hubs have really been an innovative approach to at least trying to move this work in a different direction from how it had normally happened. You know, we've increased the age of criminal responsibility. So we serve youth ages 13 to 24, 25, because you know, the frontal lobe, the brains are not even developed yet. So, you know, and I think science has proven that young people are not, they're not really responsible for all of the ways in which their brain is functioning. And add on that deprivation, add on that some of the things that don't even allow them to develop in a way. So my own kids are a little nutty and they got everything that they needed, right? So we can, I want us to think about that. So if the response to harm currently ignores the root causes, we should not be surprised when harm repeats. If we're not addressing root causes, we should not be surprised when harm repeats. If we're not addressing all of those other things in the conditions, do we really think that a program in 6 to 12 months is going to replace a lifetime of trauma? We have young people now where some of our system providers have served their parents and knew their grandparents. And now we have these generational challenges that we are trying to resolve. And so restorative justice offers us, it helps us respond to harm by centering those who have been impacted by the harm, where the person who experienced the harm has a voice in expressing what happened to them, and they get an opportunity to let you know what they need to be made whole. It's holding people accountable in meaningful ways, and it's keeping people connected to the community, because there's, you know, we've been sold this black on black crime thing where there's, you know, there's no such thing. Crime happens in proximity. White on white crime happens at the same proportion as black on black, Asian on Asian, you know, the list goes on. And so we want to, more than likely when crime happens, they have to stay connected to that same community. When we are dealing with issues now, it's young people who their parents know each other and knew each other. And so what benefit does it do to the community that we don't address those root causes and solve it in community so that they are able to coexist without our intervention? And so that is something that's been extremely helpful to us. Restorative justice asks key questions. It asks who was harmed. It asks what do they need. And it asks who's responsible to repair it. So it's no blame. It's not saying, you know, one of our first questions is we ask the same thing. From your perspective, tell me what happened. Much different from why did you do that or what made you do that. It's like from your perspective, because people's reality is their reality, and we get them to learn how to process and articulate what's happening. So restorative justice responds to harm, but it doesn't stop at the surface. And then let's talk a little bit about transformative justice. Transformative justice pushes this concept even further. So transformative justice speaks to what conditions actually created the harm in the first place and what needs to change so this doesn't keep happening. That's transform, because the restorative justice part is working with the people, and the transformation part is how do we transform these systems that continue to oppress people generations after generations. Harm does not happen in isolation. It is shaped by systems and conditions. Accountability includes both individual responsibility and systems responsibility. Healing and safety cannot be built through punishment alone. We have situations where we know some young people may end up being detained, but that is not it's not going to fix it. You're just taking them out of the community. But think about what happens when they go in congregate. The things that they have to learn to survive in jails and prisons is worse than anything they would have ever done. So they come out even more criminalized than when they went in, many of them. So when we think of, and so then we think about recidivism. You took them out the community, but did you really address the root causes of what got them there? So I want us to kind of think about that. Communities must be equipped and trusted to respond to harm. The way that situation I explained to you that happened with one of our hub participants, the community has the ability to support itself. The goal is not just to fix the moment, but to transform the entire environment. So it's the difference between, we're not just sending the young person home. That's like a reaction, right? We're saying, what are the supports, the structure, and the opportunities that are missing to make that young person successful? So restorative justice asks, how do we repair this harm? Transformative justice asks, how do we change the condition so harm is less likely to happen again? When we say root causes, no, we don't want you to fight, but more importantly, we want you to recognize the impact of fighting has on your mom, has on that other young person, has on the community as a whole, has on your children if you're a parent. We want you to understand the impact of it and we want to ensure that the conditions that created that are addressed because they're more or less likely to do that in the future when that's addressed, not just removing them from the community. And I want to tie in where privilege fits into this. Privilege is very deeply tied to who gets access to repair and who gets the benefit of the context that I'm talking about. Who gets systems designed to support them? And it's typically not Black and brown bodies. Some communities experience harm and get resources, while others that experience harm get punishment. And simply said, they are criminalized for poverty. We are basically making poverty a legal justice issue versus a lack of opportunity and access. The data shows us Black people with college degrees still get paid less than their white counterparts who may or may not have a college degree, right? We have mortality. A Black woman with health insurance may get less quality treatment of a white woman without health insurance. So these are real data points that anybody can look them up and fact check me any day. So as long as those inequities exist, how are we really creating a just community? And so I want us to think deeply. Privilege often determines whether harm is met with support or without punishment. And so, as we think about this, not in our town, and just what you do collectively and individually, we can not only respond to harm, we have to address policies, practices, and environments. And this looks like advocating for restorative and transformative approaches in all systems. We're in the state of New Jersey with only 4 hubs. Now the legislature is hearing, they're kind of passing the budget. We need more hubs. Not only for youth, we need to look at how we can use it in the adult system as well. This is a start. We need to expand it. When I think about the hub, and I think about, we use a holistic wellness approach. And if you get to come to the hub or you go on our Instagram, we have an administrative side where we do all of the work. And then we have what we call the wellness side. We have a huge multi-purpose room. We have a video game room. We have a fitness room where they can work out and do like yoga. We have a full movie theater where they go in and they watch movies. And none of the money from the grant was allowed to use to pay for that part. So it's interesting that we say we want wellness. It's interesting that we say we want all of these things, but yet anything that brings joy, we couldn't use the money for. And so somehow you are only as, we can only support, it's that you can't use your food stamps to buy potato chips kind of thinking. It's crazy to me, but those are the conditions. So yeah, we're getting hubs, we're opening these hubs and we're creating programs, but we need to reframe how we think we do that work. You get, especially if you get government funding, then they are so restrictive on what you can use it for. Some days we have kids who have a hard day. Come on, let's go get something to eat. Let's just do something fun. Who doesn't like to have a good time? I'm here for the vibes always. Right, Bob, you're here for the vibes, right? And so it's interesting, just the outdated. We are in systems that have such an outdated, antiquated way of looking at wellness and looking at support in marginalized communities. We somehow don't think that young people deserve to have fun if they've been just as impacted. So I want to lift that. So it looks like advocating for more restorative and transformative justice approaches in all systems. It looks like interrupting policies that reinforce inequity. It looks like investing in prevention, not just reaction. It costs a drop in a bucket to run the hub compared to what it costs to lock a young person up annually. If we got enough for 10 kids in a year, we will be good. And the state is still getting their money as if all of the beds are occupied. So what if, we're not saying they're not needed, but why don't we redirect where some of this funding is going if we're going to truly do a restorative and transformative community-centered approach? And listen to those most impacted and sharing power. You know, even when I'm doing this work in schools and different community-based organizations around Trenton, like, how do we share power? How do we respect that families know what they need and they know what they want, and we're so busy create solutions for them that we don't even get their input? A big part of what has made the HUD successful, when young people come, they tell us what they want to do and we make it happen. We have some idea of some programs, but I love to go to libraries, so they tease me all the time because the people at the Trenton Library know me. And then the kids started a book club, and we take them to the library. You know, we really are responsive to what they say they want. We have a bulletin board. I never thought that they paid attention to it. We do it every month. It's so nice. For the holidays, we didn't put a lot of effort in, and the girls were like, Miss Keisha, that bulletin board is trash. I was like, oh. I didn't even know you looked at the bulletin board. But next time you make it better. You know, I have a young lady who's creating a spirit week. So really creating opportunities for them to take leadership roles. So things are not happening to them. We're developing things with them. We say we walk with them. We don't do anything to them, and they are the authors of their own stories. And so we do a lot of listening and not just telling and talking. So you can't transform harm without transforming the conditions that produce it. And so I love this idea of Ubuntu, which is I am because we are. And that's what transformative justice essentially is rooted in. Our lives are all interconnected, our safety is shared, and our healing has to be collective, because it does none of us any good if anybody feels unsafe. It does none of us any good if only some of us are safe. And if the conditions are harming some of us remain, none of us are truly going to be whole. And so this is not about really having the right words. This is not about doing things in a politically correct way. It's about choosing what role you're going to have in this work toward real, true justice and really creating a restorative and transformative community. And so I would just implore everyone, be someone who notices patterns, not just incidents. If a young person has a pattern of being disruptive in a class, maybe that's something to look into. Or in any environment, be someone who asks specifically about root causes, not just the consequences. And be someone who pushes for transformation, not just temporary solutions. Enough of putting the Band-Aids on the gunshot wounds. Let's really, address where the bleeding is coming from so we can actually stop it for good. And so we know that restoration repairs harm, and transformation actually prevents it, and we need both. We can't have restoration without transformation. We can't keep responding to harm the same way and expect different outcomes. Isn't that insanity? You keep doing the same thing, but yet we have somehow subscribed to that. And the question is not just about what happened, but it's more so about what made it possible and what are we going to do about it. And there you go. So thank you. And I know we have a couple of discussion questions, or Lynn, you have a question? Mm-hmm.
Just a second, Bob.
You made the comment, can you hear me back there? Made the comment about maternal mortality being higher, and the data are much worse than what you're saying.
Oh, no, absolutely.
No, they're worse than what you're saying. Because even when a affluent or solid, a black family with solid income and health care, no questions the same as the maternal mortality is the same. And the study, and in my own institution, which was Kings County Hospital, there was an experiment which is not publishable because you can hear it in the structure. And one of my colleagues just started asking people as they walked by the hospital to have a saliva cortisol test. just, can we measure this? I need to measure it right away. And that's not publishable because there's no board studying it and there's no careful control. But African Americans across the board in a very similar economic had higher cortisol level, meaning chronic stress that
Absolutely.
exists beyond. And the other comment is the way that comment was on who gets let go to their parents, black and white. One of the issues is the way in which poverty is so expansive. Everything you're seeing in poorer communities, all the other things are nested in poverty. So oftentimes, and this one is well documented, the white family the child is let go because they have adequate resources. And the only way the black child can get resources is to be incarcerated. Oh, that is really, that tells you.
To some extent, yes.
But it's extremely difficult, and maybe it shouldn't be done to separate the race and poverty issue and always see them as integrated, tied together. Let's solve them together, because trying to solve them one at a time.
But that's exactly what I'm saying, right? We are criminalizing poverty, which
Yeah.
just should not be the thing. Thank you.
Second, thanks.
I wrote down 3 questions. Oh, I wrote down 3 questions.
I hope I have 3 answers.
One is, can you recommend a book as like an introduction to restorative justice?
Absolutely. I'm surprised I don't have it in my bag. So there is a whole collection called The Little Books. It's called The Little Book of
Oh,
Restorative.
Oxford University Press?
I don't. It's not Oxford. I'll tell you before we leave.
Okay.
And I like one. It's like 4 books in one. It's the Intro to Restorative Justice, the Intro to Circle Process. It's the Intro to Conferencing. And if you look it up, the Little Book of Restorative Justice.
Yeah.
They have a great one. And actually, one of my friends is the co-author of the Little Book of Racial Justice, and it's a great companion book as well. Okay, that was one.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, are there volunteer opportunities at the hub?
There are volunteer opportunities across the hubs, and so yes.
Just look it up. And then finally, and this is more like substantive, but are there experts on restorative justice in the room when policies about how funding can be spent are being made?
So I think the thing is, they kind of had a good idea and good intentions when they created this, but they just didn't know what restorative was. And you hear restorative thrown out there in a lot of different ways. Even with how we see they do it in the schools, it's not generally the way we do it, but they also are trying to get through learning and a lot of things. So I think this pilot has created an opportunity to have more conversations. I've been pushing back even about the data. Like, no, sorry, I can't check the box and say how many therapy sessions. Like, I could, but that doesn't do the work justice, because the work moves at the speed of trust. If a young person has been burnt through so many systems and have had all of these traumas in their lives, I don't really care about some of the things that some of the box checkers like to check. And so this has been a very unique opportunity to advocate for the work in a very unique way. And since this was new, I think in the next iteration of what it is, we worked with Rutgers was our research partner. And we also worked with EJUSA before they disbanded, to kind of collect some information on best practices. So I think moving forward, it'll be a lot more informed. And I was the only one of the directors of the hubs that came with restorative experience. So when you come to the hub, it looks and feel very different from some of the others are like youth development programs. And I have this really great Venn diagram that shows the difference between a community center and a restorative justice hub. So while they have similar elements, we are doing some very different things, because we are specifically working with high-risk young people. We are specifically, we can't have, you go to the Boys and Girls Club and there might be 50 kids or 100 kids all over the building. We can't do that if they may be gang involved. We can't do that if they got beef in the street. So we have to kind of have a lot of intelligence on how we move about to maintain safety, and knock on wood, in the time that we've been up, and we haven't had any incidents. If we heard like some girls were coming to the hub to fight, sent my staff out to the school, we shut it down. And to be honest, The fights we have are all the love quarrels. We say we don't want no more hub love because the little relationships, they start forming with one another and somebody break up with somebody. So that's more of the issue than the actual, the other stuff.
Kimmy Carlos has her hand raised on Zoom. Kimmy, did you still want to talk?
Yes. Hi, Lakisha. Thank you so much for being a speaker. I am also a Not in Our Town Princeton board member. I'm so grateful for this conversation and for all the work that you do, especially with our youth, is so important. And by the way, your hair is gorgeous. Let me just say that out
Okay.
loud.
Thank you.
There's a couple things that came to mind. The first thing that struck me was when you talked about the society where they have restorative justice as a part of their culture and how there is no policing and no crime. And that was so powerful to me because I can't even fathom living in a world like that, right? Violence is so deeply ingrained and normalized in our society, as is law enforcement, especially at growing up, in this body as a Black woman. It's hard to even fathom that. So that was a powerful statement that you made. The second thing I want to say, which might tie into the questions we're going to have in the breakout sessions, is we talked about how poverty is criminalized and how expensive poverty is. Do we really ever have conversations around how that is intentional and that is designed, right? We know that the transatlantic slave trade grew out of white supremacy, but the entire essence of it was capitalism and to build a dollar, right? And so we know that Europe specifically went to the continent of Africa because they were looking for people that would know how to manage the land, right? So it was all about building a dollar. We know that the 13th Amendment continues to do that. And the easiest way to build that slave labor is to continue to criminalize and demonize Black and brown humanity, right? And so when we talk about dismantling the justice system that we have in terms of the way we oppress Black and brown youth and young adults, we have to talk about how deeply that's tied into the capitalism in our country, right? We won't get to a restorative justice until we first really understand what underlines that, right? Because if we have too much restorative justice, no one's going to make a dollar on our prisons. No one's going to make a dollar on, the Black and brown humanity that are enslaved in the prisons and providing free labor, right? So there's such a deep connection between the two. And while yourself and so many other organizations and individuals are doing phenomenal work as a society, if we don't disconnect the two, I think we're going to have a hard time trying to get to that ideal place where there is no law enforcement and there is no crime.
I agree. And I think that's why I spent some time talking about the transformative part, right? If we start talking about the systems that create the conditions, then that's exactly what we're speaking to. And I know we have a lot of brothers and sisters throughout the state who are trying to abolish current day slavery, which is the mass incarceration. I actually was at a conference at Montclair last week with Brother Dennis Febo, who's been, he's been on the ground from state to state, really pushing against this abolition of the current active slave trade, which is our industrial prison complex. And so that goes without saying if I didn't say that, and it keeps people with a job. And even if we look at the direction of this country, we have dismantled the Department of Education and we've moved secondary and primary education into the Department of Labor. So that's speaking to exactly what's happening. So the current administration has been moving the Department of Education, and K to 12 basically will be housed under the Department of Labor now and not under the Department of Education. So it speaks exactly to your point. And that's why I said it really does us no justice if we are not really able to understand what we are really up against and do the hard work to really educate ourselves. And it's hard to know all the things. Sometimes my brain just doesn't shut down with just trying to just be aware of what's happening. But so yeah, so thank you for that comment, and I appreciate just lifting that up.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Someone else?
Thanks. I have some questions about how this is working. So you mentioned that you had a restorative practice interaction with those young men who had stolen the car. So how, and the police you said were not involved. So how did that come to you?
Because we have the relationships. This work moves at the speed of trust. The community does not trust the police. The community does not trust a lot of the people who are supposed to serve them. We have built enough what I like to call relational capital with our community and with our participants. They know we have their back. They know that we're not trying to get them locked up. They know that what we're trying to do is address the root cause. So last summer, we were able to hire 5 of our young people, as we call RJ ambassadors, because those were the highest risk needs ones, the ones who were selling drugs, the one who was stealing in the street, and now they had a job to offset, their family's income. So it's building those relationships, building trust, so that they come to us with information that we can actually support and help them, that they actually feel like someone is going to help them.
So it was the young people who committed the
So it was a
stole the
young
car
man
that
that
came
was
to you?
connected to us, him and a group of friends who weren't connected to the hub. He was the only one, and he did it with some other friends that were not connected to the hub. And there was a young lady who had a relationship with one of our staff members, and she didn't want to get them in trouble. She just wanted her car. And so what I'm saying is, when you build systems and relationships, community-centered, community-based, they trust one another. So they'll come and be very free and open and honest with us, because they know it won't be a punitive measure, but we'll actually sit and walk with them and work with them.
Great. So this program is ending this summer. I mean, the funding from the legislature. So what is going to happen?
I'm almost 100% sure that it will be put into the budget so that the hubs will remain funded, and they will potentially expand it to open 2 additional sites throughout the state. One probably North Jersey, and one probably, I'm hoping, Ocean or somewhere in Atlantic City, because they would really benefit from
Okay,
it.
so I'll talk to you later, because I'd like to know who to go to in the state legislature
Yes.
to support that.
Yes. And our own Assemblywoman, Verlena Reynolds Jackson, she was one of the authors of the original legislation. So she's been a great supporter of the work. And we have it on our website. If you go to our website and you click, we have the bill up, and you can see everyone who actually supported the bill. And there's another bill proposed now with the Assembly person, I think, in Jersey City, trying to get a hub in Jersey City. So that's kind of what's coming. I'm not sure about the other place, and so we're trying to figure that out so we know where to shape our advocacy efforts. But then I think the new wave of this, the evolved conversation is, what does wellness really look like? Wellness does not only look like therapy appointments, education. Wellness looks like, what are things that you are interested in that you get to actually explore to develop your skills? We had a young man who was selling waters on the street, and he had different issues. We learned that he can draw. He was an artist. So we did this big art activism campaign during Gun Violence Awareness Month. He sat and he painted all of these pictures, and people from the community came and purchased his art. So when we talk about restorative, that's restorative in itself. This young man was able to develop a skill and actually realize that if he took it serious, he can actually make money. So when we think about creating those kinds of opportunities, it's like, let's think outside the box. If I have a young person who's not going to school, yeah, I care about them not going to school. So we have a computer lab, and we do that. That goes without saying. But if this family just got evicted, and they lived with the grandmother, and everybody, usually if you get evicted, you go live with grandma, right? You usually go with and everybody was evicted. Am I asking him about, did he do his homework, or did he go to school? No, I don't care. He doesn't. That's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Going to school is not his immediate need. His immediate need is, how do I find a stable place to lay my head, and how do I support my family with money so we don't have to stay in hotels and bounce around? So again, I think we have to stop projecting what we look at as quality of life, meet people where they are, and help them kind of get the things that they feel like they need for themselves. And hopefully through that process, we expose them. Like over the summer, we took the kids over to New York City, so they got to go to the Met. They got to go to iHeartRadio and meet the Breakfast Club. And so they get these really great, unique opportunities. And that's important to us because they need to see that it's possible. And if they're only in Trenton and they're only dealing with their trauma, when do they get to just be kids? You know, we have some of the kids, they are really rough, and we get them to go to the circus squad and just play. And first time it's like, I'm not going, I'm not doing that. Next thing you know, I'm getting videos of kids playing. Look at that. Oh, wow. No cell phones, no video games. They're just playing. And like, we forget that those opportunities are important and those experiences are important because we spend so much time almost treating them like mini adults, like their lives are different from the quality of lives we want for people who we're connected to.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Lakisha. This has been fabulous. And thank you so much for the work you're doing.